Hello and welcome to this year's virtual open evening. My name is Miss Cheryl Lambers, I'm the Head of History, and I'm here to present the history curriculum for the Year 7s all the way up to the GCSE. I'm very much looking forward to taking you through this whistle-stop tour through time so that you can see all of the amazing work that the students will do during their time at Burlington Danes. So we start off in Year 7 with a study of what is history. Students look at the concepts of a narrative, structure, they look at chronology, and they focus on making sure that they understand what a timeline is and its use. We then move on to having a look at the Vikings and how the Vikings dominated English history at the beginning of the 11th century. And then moving on, we have a look at Anglo-Saxon England and how Edward the Confessor, who died in 1066, left no heir, so no successor, nobody to take over after him to the throne. And so there was a war between the four men that you can see on the screen. On the far left, we have Edgar the Atheling, who was a 15-year-old teenager and whose claim was quite comical. And then we have Harold Hardrada in the centre there, a huge Viking man, King of Norway, an amazing warrior. He's followed by the man next to him, Harold Godwinson, who was an earl in England and very much liked and loved by the Anglo-Saxons. And finally, we have William, Duke of Normandy, who goes on to become William I of England. In the second part of the autumn term, the students have a look at Harold Godwinson, who is the man you can see in the centre of this picture, who was actually crowned the King of England after Edward dies without an heir. And they look at what England was like when he was in power and how successful he was. We then follow this up with a study on how Harold was eventually defeated in the Battle of Hastings against his rival William, and how William eventually becomes the King of England. In the spring term, for continuity, we look at how William changed England forever. We look at the feudal system and the Domesday Book, and then we look at the different things that William did to consolidate his power. Then in the spring term, we look at the plague and how it arrived in England in 1348, and finally how that led to a peasants' revolt by the end of the 14th century. This is a really nice way for students to link their learning that they've done in the previous terms and to have a look at a more popular uprising. We then move on to looking in the summer term to some things outside of Europe and outside of England. We start with a study on the Silk Road, which was the major trade route from Asia going all the way through to Europe, and all of the raw materials that were brought through, those amazing raw materials. Then we use those raw materials, those primary sources, to see what they can tell us about the medieval Islamic world and how much the medieval Islamic world has shaped the world that we live in today. We then finally in Year 7 look at the Crusades, so the big war between the two main religions of Islam and Christianity at that time. We look at the tension over the city of Jerusalem, which you can see in the background of this picture. And finally, we look at Salahuddin and Richard the Lionheart and how they led their crusades and the rivalry that they had. We also offer a really broad Year 8 curriculum. We start by looking at Henry VIII, and we look at a study on the power of the monarchy from Henry VIII all the way to Charles I, spanning over 150 years of history. We then zoom in on the city of Timbuktu and the Empire of Mali, and then in turn some other West African kingdoms that you can see on the map right now. We then finish off our study of Year 8 by looking at 2 units that look at the power to the people. So you can see Claudia Jones, who's on the slide right now. We look at British civil rights, something that she was really involved in with the Notting Hill Carnival. And then we look at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and their involvement in the American civil rights struggle. Then in Year 9, we're looking more at the 20th century, and we are looking at World War I to begin with. We then move on to look at the aftermath of World War I and the rise of the Nazis, and go into World War II as well. We then look at the aftermath of World War II and the decolonisation of the Caribbean And this time we look at the decolonization of East Africa, particularly looking at Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and parts of Egypt and the Middle East. This broad diversity continues into our GCSE spec. So we look at we take the Edexcel exam board here, and the first thing that we look at is warfare through time. So we look at how war has changed from 1250 all the way to the present day. We then follow this up with a study of Weimar and Nazi Germany, something which the students will be very familiar with by this point, having studied it in Year 9. We then follow up with perhaps my favourite thing to study at GCSE at Burlington Danes, which is conflict in the Middle East. We look at the conflict between the Arab nations and Israel. And finally, we look at the hostilities which were caused by the Cold War. This is then rounded off by a module on the Anglo-Saxons, again helping the students to recap that knowledge all the way from Year 7. The history curriculum at Burlington Danes is incredibly broad and very diverse. We aim to equip all students with a critical mind in order to become productive citizens of society. I really look forward to meeting some of you when you join us in September 2021. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop a line to the BDA message online on the website. I really hope that you have a lovely virtual open evening, and take care, stay safe.